Every morning I wake up early, and at night, I usually sit in silence, lost in my thoughts. My dog Jack was always by my side. His presence became something so familiar that I couldn't imagine a night without him. It seemed like the night would be empty and unsettling without him. He had always been my loyal companion, never leaving me alone. But that night, everything changed. It was a cold autumn night. Light rain tapped on the roof, and the wind moaned somewhere outside my house. The evening seemed ordinary. I sat in my chair, staring blankly at the TV, not really listening to what they were saying. Suddenly, Jack's barking broke the calm. It wasn't his usual bark, the kind he made when greeting me or asking for food. There was something sharp in it, something almost panicked. I glanced at the door, standing up from my chair. The barking continued, growing more frantic, but Jack was somewhere outside, out of my sight. "Jack!" I called, moving toward the window. But as soon as I opened it to look outside, a sudden, unnatural silence fell. The barking stopped. Complete, absolute silence hung in the air, as if everything had frozen. I stood by the window, peering into the dark. There was nothing. A thick fog blanketed the yard and trees, turning them into strange, barely discernible shapes. I thought I saw movement far off in the distance, but it could have been just the wind sweeping up dry leaves. A sense of unease started creeping up my spine. "Jack!" I called again, louder, but no answer came. Jack never strayed far from the house, and he had never gone silent like this when I called. Worry began gnawing at me. I grabbed the flashlight from the table near the door and headed outside. As soon as I opened the door, the cold night air hit me, seeping into my bones. I stepped out. Silence. Only my footsteps on the wet ground broke the night's stillness. I kept calling Jack, but there was no response. My hand shook slightly as I turned on the flashlight, sweeping its beam across the yard. The light cut through the fog, but it wasn't enough. Visibility was limited. I was about to return to the house when I heard it. A faint, distant whimper. It came from somewhere deep in the woods, near the old lake. It was unmistakably Jack's cry. My stomach twisted. The lake. The locals always said something was wrong with it. People often disappeared there. At first, it was fishermen, and later, tourists. I had always thought those were just stories, village tales told to scare kids away from the dangerous waters at night. But now, knowing Jack was out there, a real fear settled over me. I threw on a raincoat and started walking toward the lake, almost as if something inside me compelled me forward. My feet carried me toward the sound, where Jack's whimper grew fainter, fading into the thick fog. The silence surrounding me was suffocating, and only the faint sound of my footsteps on the wet earth reminded me I was still in this world. As I neared the lake, it greeted me with a dead calm. The water was black as tar and as still as glass. Only the faint beam of my flashlight allowed me to see the shore, littered with wet rocks and dried seaweed. And that's when I saw him. Jack. He stood on the opposite shore, covered in mud, terrified. His paw was bleeding, and he trembled. I called to him, and he hesitantly limped toward me, pressing himself against my legs, seeking comfort. But something wasn't right. He wasn't just injured. Jack was trembling with fear, and in his eyes, I saw something worse than pain. I saw terror, and that sent chills down my spine. We started making our way back to the house, but the feeling that something was watching us never left. Every step felt like it was being observed, like invisible eyes were following us. I constantly looked over my shoulder, but there was nothing. The fog thickened, as if the forest itself was trying to swallow us. Then Jack suddenly stopped, his fur bristling. He barked frantically, then bolted away along the shore as if something was chasing him. I didn't have time to stop him. He disappeared into the fog, and then the silence returned. An unnatural, oppressive silence. Even my own footsteps seemed to vanish, as if the ground beneath me had stopped making noise. My heart raced, and cold chills ran down my spine. I froze. That's when I felt it. Something was standing behind me. I couldn't move, paralyzed by fear, but the instinct to survive overpowered everything. Slowly, I turned, and that's when I saw it. The creature stood on the opposite shore, enormous and unnatural, its silhouette blurred and strangely distorted, as if its body defied the laws of physics. Its shape shifted constantly, and its eyes, if they were eyes, glowed faintly with an eerie light. I couldn't look away, paralyzed by terror. It didn't move, but it was somehow getting closer. The air around me grew heavy, and every movement felt like a monumental effort. I had to run, but my legs wouldn't respond. The creature stood there watching, studying me. I took a step backward, then another. My flashlight slipped from my hand, dropping to the ground and plunging everything into even deeper darkness. "Jack," I whispered, trying to regain control of my body. "Let's go home." Jack whimpered softly behind me, as if pleading with me not to move. But I had to get out of here. Backing away from the lake, I felt the creature's gaze on me with every step. Each movement sent my heart racing, but I knew I couldn't stop. Not now. Finally, the house came into view, a small island of safety in a sea of darkness. I stumbled through the door, slamming it shut with such force that the echo reverberated through the house. Jack was under the table, shaking. I stood there, catching my breath, listening to the blood pounding in my ears. Moments passed, and the silence returned. But this silence was different. It wasn't the oppressive silence of the lake and the creature. The house seemed to regain its familiar, safe atmosphere. I slowly sank to the floor, feeling the tension begin to release from my body. But something still wasn't right. I stood up and cautiously walked to the window, peering outside. The lake, hidden behind the trees, was still shrouded in fog, but nothing moved. No sign of the creature. No sound. I took a deep breath and turned to Jack, who now sat quietly at my feet. His eyes still held fear, but he was here, alive. We were safe. At least I wanted to believe that. But as I closed the curtains and tried to convince myself that it was over, I heard it again. A faint creaking, barely audible but unmistakably coming from outside. Like something slowly, inevitably approaching the house. I didn't go outside again that night. And since then, I've never gone back to the lake. But sometimes, in the quietest nights, when the wind dies down and the fog wraps around the house, I can feel its presence. It's there, beyond the trees, near the black water, waiting. And I know, one day it will return.